Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today, I have some very terrifying encounters that I'd really like to share with you. Before we get into them, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. My merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe, click the like button, and please leave a comment. It really does help, and it definitely matters. And now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's upload, shall we? Guys, I have some very exciting news I'd like to share with you all. I have some new thumbnail art and kind of banners that were designed for the channel to reflect the name change. As you guys know, who have been with the channel for a while, it was Dogman Encounters with Jeffrey Nadolny. And now it's Dogman and Paranormal Research with Jeff Nadolny. I commissioned a very talented artist who is a subscriber of the channel to create some new logos and banners, etc. I'm going to be putting them on the new merch, some new sweatshirts, t-shirts, mugs, etc. And very shortly, the new banner for the channel will be unveiled. So I'm very excited about that, and I'm looking forward to it, and I will keep you guys in the loop when it comes time to check it all out. Let's get into today's encounters. Today's first encounter. I grew up in the small foothills of eastern Kentucky where folklore and stories of haints and mountain monsters run rampant. Everyone has that cousin or an uncle that saw Bigfoot while out hunting, or an aunt that swears she saw a ghost in the old high school that one time. So it's hard to discern what's the truth and what's fiction. Most of what I've personally seen or heard while out in the mountains, I've usually attributed to the local wildlife. Have I seen anything that's unexplainable to my logical mind? Not yet. But I'm also not arrogant enough to think that these things don't exist. By logic, we have to assume that 10% of all of these experiences we see are true, and that those people witness something amazing and terrifying. In my small town, the Dogman is a known perpetrator of many mishappenings. I've heard stories of it killing chickens, trying to bust down doors, attacking hikers, or just being a nuisance on someone's farm and property. I've also heard stories of it stalking those that live deep in the woods, coming to stare into their windows at night, or even protecting them from strangers that made their way onto their land at some point. The majority of these people like to tell booger stories, as we say. They like having a grand story to tell people for attention or just the pleasure of telling it. I'm not sure which, but a few are trustworthy, and they are usually the ones that will only tell their tale if asked. My grandfather was one of them. Yeah, I know I sound biased because it's my grandfather, but I have 6 uncles and an aunt that literally could make a living out of their lies they tell about local cryptids, and I'm more than happy to call them liars. My grandfather, though, he was a very logical man. He was a skeptic in everything cryptid, as well as spirits and ghosts, always looking for a logical explanation, and usually pissing off the storyteller as well by questioning everything. That's why I tend to believe him, because he never tried to lie to me and his other grandkids. If anything, he was always the voice of reason we ran to when we were scared. But once, when I was younger, I asked him if he had ever seen anything before, be it a ghost or a monster, I had been hearing stories from my uncles all day about Bigfoot, Haints, etc., and wanted to know his thoughts on it. He sat there for a moment, not even acknowledging my question, and when I was about to ask again in case he hadn't heard me, he spoke up. When he and my grandmother had first bought our family homestead, they had heard fantastical stories about monsters that roamed that part of the mountains and how evil they were. My grandmother was a little scared, but my granddad said he just shook his head and went on. He figured it was a few black bears that people had been hearing and seeing, or even some bobcat, and that he wasn't too worried about it. About 2 months into them living there, sure enough, he had seen a mama bear and some cubs making their way up the mountain behind the house. So he didn't think too much when he heard something pounding on his front door one night, scratching at it and trying to get in. He told me that he had grabbed his shotgun before going to the door. He tried to look out the front window to see if he could catch a glimpse of whatever or whoever was there, but he could only see a large black shadow being cast on the porch. Being the fearless soul that he was, this man fought in World War II and was under General George S. Patton, so you can imagine what he had all seen. He unlocks the door and swings it open, expecting a bear or even a person standing there. It was neither. What he saw that night still had him shook up when he told me this story, some 50-odd years later. He said that as the door swung open, he saw an extremely large humanoid standing there. It stood a good 6.5 feet, and was slightly hunched over as it stood on the covered porch. Its arms were long, the hands reached well past its knees, which were bending in the opposite direction of a human. He said that it was covered in a thick black fur, very dense and dark, and that it smelled like the mix of wet dog and raw sewage. Lastly, the face, or rather the head, was what brought him up short. He said it looked like a German shepherd's head had been placed on this large, hairy, human-shaped body, and that as he looked at it, it cocked its head sideways, looked back down at him, its eyes showing fear and confusion. He told me that he pulled his gun up, and before his finger could hit the trigger, it took off, but not before he got off a warning shot, right in its right calf muscle. He said the howl that came out of it when he had shot it scared him more than anything in his life had, and he ran back inside, bolting the door closed. He stood there listening as the cries and howls began to fade as it ran deeper into the mountains, until he couldn't hear it any more before he moved away from the door and went back to bed. He swore to me on all things he held dear that this thing would still show up sometimes, dragging its wounded leg across his porch as it came up to the door. But it really never bothered anything again. He said it would come up to the door, sniff around before growling softly, then take off again. He told me there were a lot of things in the woods that can hurt you, be it beast or a plant, and a lot more things that could scare you, but the thing he saw that night was the scariest of them all, and that I'd best never go looking for it because I would woefully regret it if I ever came across it. My granddad has been gone for 15 years now, and I still believe every word he told me that day. Does that prove the existence of such a creature as the Dogman? Maybe not. And the words of an old war vet wouldn't be enough to change the minds of some people, but to me, it's the realest experience I've ever heard about this creature. I hope that someday someone can get an actual documented proof, if only to prove what my granddad went through and what he saw that night. Second encounter. We've all heard of the Watchers, and for those of you who have not, they are kind of an entity that is seen in mountain ridges and off in the distance, just watching. Not really doing anything or interacting with anything, but watching. And of course, there are assumptions of what these creatures or entities are. This is an experience with one of those so-called Watchers. I've been seeing the world in a very different way for about 4 months now. I see everything teeming with movement and energy, and it often appears to do these things. Recoil when I notice it, move closer towards me, or show me things, and I think I get what they are doing, or I understand my interpretation of what I am seeing or sensing, but I do wonder if that's the case. I remember when the phenomena went to a higher level. I had left my keys at someone's house where I had spent the night. I got an Uber home at around 3 in the morning and realized I did not have my keys. I left them at his place. He said he would look, but couldn't initially find them. My phone battery was about to expire with no charger and no other set of keys left with a trusted individual. The building manager didn't answer the several attempts, and I panicked, calling my friend. I knew she couldn't help, but I don't like to be on the streets at night by myself in the area where I live. I did not want to walk around the streets at all, so I went 2 blocks and down into the forested ravine with a stream flowing through it. I'm familiar with the trails, and I thought I'd be more hidden and safe there. As soon as the trees were in front of me, the darkness of the shadows seemed to stretch to grab hold of me. I felt nervous and my heart beat faster, but I went into the blackness nonetheless. I sat on some stairs down the trail which led deeper into the ravine. I kept hearing footsteps and bushes being disturbed. I went down the stairs and off the path over a fence toward the stream. As I approached the stream, I saw something bending down over 3 feet drop towards the water. It was silvery and white, like it was glowing, and picked up on me as I set my eyes on it right away. I thought it was a coyote until it stood up facing me, then dove into the water. All I heard was a splash as it vanished into the surface of the water that must have been no more than 3 feet perhaps. I'm suspicious of the clarity of what I saw because I didn't see it resurface. I approached the rocks going into the stream and watched the water, listening silently. It was right beside the bridge going over the stream, and when it dove, then I could very clearly see 2 people walk to the middle of the bridge and stop and look at me. It was in my periphery of my vision, and I never sensed their features clearly, as it was in the dark forest lit by only the night sky. I walked to the bridge, but they faded into shadows before I got close enough. I investigated the bridge and the spot. I saw something. I went to the side of the stream and sat on a fallen log where I saw a white-haired, bearded green man holding a walking stick. He just watched me. He seemed to be doing something with his hands, but I couldn't see what. I went closer, but he faded into the bushes and trees. I went back to the bridge, and now it was lit up by the twilight sky. I figured it would be quiet now in the streets and headed home. Up on the streets down the alley, the first block home, I saw a homeless man digging and standing inside a bin until he faded into the garbage and no one was there. It was weird because I thought he seemed grumpy and miserable. The way he seemed to back up from me and fall backwards felt really alarming, and this made me realize I'm witnessing something unusual, and I thought back to it. The shadows reached to grab me when the trees were first in front of me. The next bin was concealed by an open brick enclosure. I sensed and saw a man just as he went out of sight behind the bin. I thought I heard him singing too. I stopped and watched a couple of seconds, but felt him gone. The weirdest thing happened as I waited for someone to come to the alley entrance. A guy on a bike wearing a huge skull ring, black jeans, and a leather jacket was checking out the bin behind my building. I thought to ask him the time because my phone was dead and I had no idea what time it was. I think he said it was 7 or 8. He walked up to me with his bike and stood in front of me while I'm sitting on my step. I commented on his ring, saying I like it. He said thank you. Then he asked me a question, which was, how would you go about collecting $300,000 from somebody who owes you money? Magic was my immediate response. After a weird but casual conversation, I took a chunk of noble shungite, a mineral that contains fullerness, or 3D spherical molecules made of 60 carbon atoms, out of my pocket and offered it to him, saying that it's shaped like the angel of death. He agreed and got really happy and excited. He took out a tiger eye tombstone and said that it was his girlfriend's who'd passed away. Someone, a lady from my building, was approaching, and I asked her if she had keys to get in because I had lost mine. She said she was going to ask me the same thing. And then I heard footsteps coming downstairs. I said, somebody, probably the manager, is coming down now. Then he was standing in the door and opened it. The man in a leather jacket asked, "Are you psychic?" I guess he didn't hear what I had heard. So I went upstairs to my apartment, put some seeds out on the railing of my balcony for the chickadees, and lied down on the couch to wait for them to come and eat. I like to tell them I put those seeds there because they fill me with joy when I see them eat. Those chickadees are always telling me what's up. I see different things now, like there are beings all around us most of the time, and I didn't even realize it before. I don't know what I should do with this, or if I can hone it somehow and be able to control it or improve it in any way. I also don't know how I should be when I experience sights and senses, like the movement in the air, smells, temperature changes, and psychological impressions. I don't know how else to describe them. I'm really looking for any kind of response to this. I've explained this to a lot of people. Someone said I saw nature spirits. My dad said it must have been a beaver that dove into the water. Another person said they've experienced things that fade into its surroundings, and she told me a story about seeing a little girl standing in a doorway at a dark bathroom, but upon investigating in the morning, it turned out only to be a fan. What are your thoughts after hearing this? I appreciate any perspectives. Very interesting. She obviously has some sort of psychic connection, and these watchers can be everywhere. I mean, we've all probably seen them just out of the periphery of our vision, dark night, we see something, and then bam, we turn and it's not there. The spiritual world is very powerful, very powerful. On to tonight's final encounter. The encounter occurred one weekend morning roughly a decade ago in the spring or summer, while B was driving home from work through Madison, Wisconsin's Midvale Heights neighborhood at around 2:30 a.m. At the time, she was working as a shot girl at the bar in nearby Sun Prairie, but emphasized that she had not been drinking, nor was she overtired. I was on a residential street just blocks away from home, and what I saw were two huge wolf-like creatures in tandem darting across the road in front of me. I was startled and hit the brakes, but they had disappeared before I had gotten a good look at them. Truthfully, this memory has stuck with me more than any other sighting of an animal crossing the road because it was so weird the way they appeared. It was like two dogs side by side, almost like how sled dogs are hooked up. But they were huge, bigger than a wolf, more like a bear, a solid white-silver color. But their features were not entirely there. It was closer to an outline and a shadow. It appeared almost like a projection that scanned right to the left, across the street in a flash. I don't remember their feet touching the ground. They did not move normally. It was like a blip in reality. Or they briefly appeared running in another dimension and bled through to the street in front of me. It didn't make any sense, but it didn't really scare me. Just startled that I almost hit them, but simultaneously not afraid that even if I did hit them, they were probably just an apparition. And since I believe in this stuff anyway, I just shrugged it off as that's weird and went home. There were no other cars present, and the occurrence was maybe all of 3 to 5 seconds. No other lights on or remarkable weather. No forest nearby, or really any reason why two giant wolves would be roaming around. It was like a flashbulb type of projection. She went on to describe the creatures in more detail, saying that they were like a bad child's drawing of a great wolf, exaggerated lumpy features and the size of a lion. It was like a blur or a smear, like the kid drew an outline of it and then ran his hand over it, she said. But I remember my brain saying wolf, but then quickly realized it wasn't because it was so huge, like the size of a lion. B wasn't particularly frightened by her experience, only momentarily startled. It truly was just weird, huh? Moment. And then I went home and went to bed. The lane that I was on was not that long of a street, and definitely not a rural area, so two giant wolves made no sense to me. They just didn't move normally. They moved, blurred, too fast across the street into the shadows. The encounter is reminiscent of a pair of strange creature encounters near Balut, Wisconsin. A more recent of those took place outside of Rockton, Illinois in 2019. In that instance, a man and his wife were driving home at 11 p.m., August 8th, 2019, when they spotted something unrecognizable as any normal animal. My wife spotted eyes reflecting light and assumed it was a normal animal, a possum or raccoon. I saw movement and said, "Deer," as if it had longer front legs, like a tall dog. The man said then, as it crossed the road in front of us, we realized that it was not a deer or any other easily recognized animal. I've grown up in rural areas and am well acquainted with the various rural creatures. It was not a coyote or a fox. It had a rounded head, a flat face, no snout or muzzle. It had no obvious ears. They were very tight against its head, dark brown in color. Most muddy red in the car headlights, long, slim tail that curled under it as it loped across the road. It moved in a way that could only be compared to an ape or a bear style of movement, as if all fours was faster, but not completely necessary. My wife and I thought it moved like a gibbon. It left a bizarre impression on us both, as we cannot settle on the creature that we believe it could have been. The chimeric creature described in the report is eerily similar to something reported seen by a wife and her husband near Beloit, Wisconsin in 2013. That sighting took place only 8 miles north of this one. According to the wife's testimony regarding that encounter, it moved like a cat, graceful with a long, flicky tail. It didn't look like a cat, though, except for its head. It was dark, but not black. Brindled, dark browns with some black. The fur was short like a dog, with some glossiness to it. Its head was massive and triangular shaped. The eyes were large and green. The head looked so robust, like you could hit it with a bat, and it would break the bat. It was flat like a cat, no snout like a dog or bear. Its chest was also triangular shaped and really muscular, with legs that came down like a bulldog's. The back end was a smaller triangle with legs that came off like a German shepherd. This thing had big solid muscles. I think the top of its head would have come up to my chin, so about 4 foot. The tail was about the same length as its body. This was what was confusing. It moved like a cat, but did not look like one. The earlier witness explained. The whole time I had this feeling it knew we were watching and found the situation amusing. Also, the longer you watched it, the harder it became to see it, like its edges were blurring. It got about 30 feet from the road and lied down in a C shape, just like a cat. It was staring at us, and we were staring at it. But the longer I looked at it, it almost seemed to become pixelated. A more recent witness described a similar feeling of high strangeness during his encounter. There was definitely a sense of oddity. Even now my head is trying to wriggle up a fit as to what it was. the whole incident lasted only 1 or 2 seconds. As for B, she had not heard of the other sightings in southern Wisconsin, but admitted they did seem similar to her own. The pixelation reference caught my attention, she said. Yeah, it was similar to that, but not quite the same. Interesting. Portals are opening, I feel. I really do. The way these things are being told, these strange creatures that just don't fit the natural world. Almost like what I saw. It just didn't fit the natural world. It was too strange, too creepy. And exactly like what Claudia Ackley describes. Just very strange things that really can't be controlled, and I don't think we ever will be able to control these portals from opening and what comes out of them and where they go and what they do. I know some are definitely evil. I don't know about all. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed today's upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Please, everyone, stay safe and have a great day. You thought I was going to end it there without saying it, didn't you? May the Great Spirit watch over us all, guys, and may He guide us down that path that we call life.